Welcome to Module 2. This module will take you through the evolution of accessible policies in India, starting from the first attempt in 1995 with the formulation of the Persons with Disabilities, Equal Opportunities, Protection of Rights, and Full Participation Act to several guidelines, campaigns, and codes, and finally we have the RPWD Act, Harmonized Guidelines, and the revised URDPFI as shown in the timeline. The PPTs of this module will explain in details about major provisions related to inclusive cities in all relevant national codes, guidelines, and acts. Let us take a look at the acts, guidelines, codes, and movements. We have the Accessible India Campaign or Sugamya Bharat Scheme 2015, then the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, the Urban and Regional Development Plan Formulation and Implementation Guidelines or URDPFI 2015, and the URDPFI with amendments on inclusion done in 2021. You also have the Harmonized Guidelines and Standards for Universal Accessibility in India 2021, the National Building Code NBC 2016, the Universal Design India Principles 2011, Indicators for Child-Friendly Local Development iChild by NIUA 2016, IRC 103 to 2012 Guidelines for Pedestrian Design Facilities, and IRC 67 2012 Code of Practice for Road Signs.
The Accessible India Campaign or Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan 2015 stresses on three aspects: built environment, transport system, and ICT ecosystem, all of which are extremely relevant for making our cities safe, accessible, and inclusive. Very important is the RPWD Act of 2016, and the specialty of this act lies in consideration of all categories of disabilities and including all sectors of planning like living, education, employment, mobility, services, communication, and recreation. So, most of you who are planners, you are aware of the URDPFI as one-stop urban planning reference document in India, which has been recently updated. Clauses related to inclusive planning have been added in various sections and at all levels like perspective plan, development plan, local area plan, and special purpose plans. Our National Building Code also has few provisions related to inclusion, which have been mentioned. Extracts from the relevant annexures have been given in the detailed PPTs, which you need to refer to. The Harmonized Guidelines 2021 is a very important document in this respect and as an easy reference, practitioner's guide for multiple aspects, which include external elements like master plans, site planning, transportation facilities, internal elements like entrance corridors, internal doors and fixtures, etc. Information and wayfinding system like signage and tactile maps. Different building typologies are also touched upon, and also it includes building operation and maintenance for existing buildings. Links are there. You can download it. Next, you have the IRC guidelines, particularly the one on the pedestrian facilities is important in this context because they deal particularly with the safety aspect. IRC guidelines on bus rapid transit deal with accessible urban transport like passenger access, bus interior, station design, driver training, passenger information. IRC for road signs are also important for easy wayfinding. All the links are given, so please download this PDF for more reference. We have also included the indicators for child-friendly local development iChild, which was published by National Institute of Urban Affairs in 2016, which targets to shape the future direction of India's urban policy towards child-friendly development.
The module 2 includes some very interesting examples from India related to different aspects of urban planning, like infrastructure, outdoor environment, livelihood, mobility, governance, and participation, and tourism and recreation. We have now accessible schools, as you can see, with accessible wash facilities, good examples of accessible urban transport like low-floor buses, accessible metro coaches, safe streets, accessible urban hearts. The RPWD Act states that PWD have right to accessible recreational places. In line with that, there are examples of accessible parks, sensory, barrier-free play areas, accessible beaches, and accessible tourism. Accessible urban services like polling booths, skill development center, and the one-stop platform for all information on disability in India, Mera Mitra.
We have already stated that inclusion is a multi-sectoral phenomenon. And we have talked about the 6 sectors. I will introduce you to the 6 sectors in the orientation PPT. Now, there are sectors like housing, which not only include accessible dwelling units just at the building level, but also gives importance to the supportive mechanism for vulnerable group to own or rent a dwelling unit. Health and sanitation, but not only accessible hospitals just, but also talks about telemedicine and door-to-door solid waste collection. These are important points at city level, which you need to understand. Education needs to be accessible. Does not mean only barrier-free elements in schools, but it needs to be linked to the skill development so that it becomes more meaningful. Urban mobility and transportation, of which information is important. Information on accessible mobility options is very important so that people have a sense of reliability on the system. Otherwise, people will not come out and use transportation system, even if it is accessible. Availability of tailor-made jobs and sensitive HR policies are equally important as accessible workplaces. So these have been given a highlight. These have been highlighted in our ICF. Think about administration. User-friendly app for feedback ensures citizen participation, and it is an effective step towards good governance. So whenever these apps are designed, it should be made accessible to all categories of people. And we have talked about this triad, that is feedback mechanism, monitoring and planning standards, which is important. So this is the module, all about the module 2, and the next module, that is module 3, will explain the working of the ICF, that is how planning standards can be prepared based on strategic accessibility audit. It will also talk of feedback dependent monitoring mechanism for effective implementation.